RC Jim here again, and today I'd like to tell you all about the Spektrum NX series of transmitters. Quite nice, and very pleased with it, especially compared to the old things that I used to fly with, the non-computer radios that you couldn't really do much. But yeah, Spektrum NX, this is NX6. Of course, you can get additional channels if you like. Go for your life. This one comes with 7 programmable buttons. You know, as you add channels, you get another dial up here and additional switches and whatever. But with this one, you got a variety of switches, many 3-position switches, a couple 2-position switches. Can program to do anything you want. A bind button, which also can be programmed to do whatever you like. You got your standard set of gimbals. This one's set up mode 2. You can change any of the radios between mode 1 and mode 2, between the software settings in the radio and the physical settings here on the box. All good that way. To turn it on, you just simply press on this raised part of the logo thingy there, and that turns it on for you. Got 3 buttons down the left, a delete and reset sort of key, a back menu key, and a function key. Function gives you a list of functions that you have set up down there. You got a scroll wheel on the side. You scroll it to go between different menu options, and then when you get the one that you want, you push it in to be able to select that particular option. As you first set it up, they will have an acro plane in there as sort of the standard thing that first comes up. But to select anything you want, you press these first 2 buttons together, and that'll give you a list of your models. And one of them would be acro. So you can either use that or you could add a new model. When you select one of these, if you were to select a different one, it's going to go directly into a system setup list. Okay, and it'll ask you, do you want to disconnect the RF so it's not communicating to plane? That's fine. If you didn't select one, it's like this, where you just simply, when you select the plane, it comes up with that screen, and when you press in the button, it goes to a function list. The function list and the system setup are 2 different things. The function list has to do with how things work and adjustments that you make that you might want to be fine-tuning. So that's why it's the initial thing that comes up when you've got an existing model. But the system setup list, this one down here in the function list menu, you pick that one. That's the one that you get where you first set things up with your planes. That's the place to start. Okay, model select is just where you select the particular one, like we did when we pressed the 2 buttons together. Model type just simply allows you to pick an icon for the type of model that you've got, and whether it's a drone, airplane, helicopter, and that will have to do with some of the settings in there. So it says the data is going to be reset when you select a model type. You then give a model name, and acro is the first one, but I suggest you change that. And the way you change it is the scroll wheel moves the top arrow. Well, actually moves both things, but you start out by looking at the top arrow, get that to where the letter is that you want to change, press it in, that selects the letter, and then you give it some sort of name. So go to the next one, select the letter, go to the next one, select the letter, and the next one, select the letter, and you got it. Okay, aircraft type. This is going to be what sort of controls you've got on the plane. So if all you have is ailerons, elevator, and rudder, you got a normal wing and a normal tail, that's the one that you get. But if you got something else, you go down to the item that needs to be changed. So let's say you got flaps. You go to the wing, press in, that is selecting that particular thing. Use the scroll wheel to get what you've got. And probably the most common thing that you're going to have if you've got flaps is this one here. 1 aileron and 1 flap. And what that means is that 1 channel is working the ailerons and 1 channel is working the flaps. Now it might have 1 or 2 servos on either of those control surfaces, but as far as the radio is concerned, it's just plugged into 1 channel and so that's what it's doing it. So that's the thing that's most likely. Note that if you don't select one of the things here that has flaps, then you're not going to have the option to set up flaps in the menu. So this is a very important step to go through. Okay, F mode, that has to do with flight mode. And so you go into there, and you can do one of two things. You can either have one switch that does 3 different flight modes, like say a low rate, medium rate, and a high rate, and that it affects all of the control surfaces. Or you can have one switch, say, for the rudder, one switch for the aileron, one switch for the elevator. And then if one of those particular things you want to soften up, then you could flick that to a different position. And myself, I go for just using the one switch. So we'll set it up that way. So switch 1 is the only one that we're going to use. We select that, and then we could scroll through to find the switch, but the simple thing to do is just simply flick the switch that you want to use. And when you flick that switch, it's automatically going to recognize that that's the fit switch. So it's identified the switch. We now need to select it by pushing in the scroll wheel. That one is now selected. And it'll have flight mode 1, flight mode 2, and flight mode 3. So that's all set. Spoken flight mode is just simply what it's going to say when you are using the different switches. And the standard thing is just flight mode 1, flight mode 2, and so forth. I go down to test. Okay, so it's telling me what it is for each one of those, so that's all fine. Channel assign, now this is important for just simply plugging into the cables into your receiver on the aircraft. Your receiver might not be labeled as to which thing goes where, and so this tells you which channels to plug in, which cables to plug into which channels. And note here that it's quite serious about saying that channel 5 is gear if you've got retractable landing gear. Try to change that and it really messes things up, but just leave it like it is and you'll be fine. Trim setup is for big changes of trim. Most likely you won't have to do that. Model utilities is if you want to delete a model or back up a model or something like that with the settings, and it doesn't hurt to do that. That's a good idea. Warnings, you can pretty well leave that. It's where it is. It's various warnings that come up for various things that happen with the system, like low battery and stuff like that. Telemetry we'll leave for another day. Pre-flight setup is just to set up a checklist that you can see on the screen to use like a pilot uses when he's getting ready to fly, to go through the various items, check to make sure everything's good. Frame rate is if you have certain types of servos, you can go for a faster frame rate and get a little bit quicker response out of them. You know, going from one very small amount of time to another very small amount of time. Bind is just an alternate way to bind the transmitter. Normally what you're going to do is in the airplane, you're going to put it into the bind mode, either with a bind plug or with a Spektrum receiver holding in the button. The light will start flashing. When that's flashing, the normal thing you do is hold in this bind button here. Press the start button and wait for it to bind, and then you're all set. But instead of using the bind button and the switch, you can use this bind menu here. Serial port setup, we will leave that for another time. Trainers, if you want to set up a buddy box system, we'll leave that as a separate video. Center tone is when the stick goes past the middle, it'll make a tone, and so clearly it's not doing that right now, but you could set it up to do that if you really wanted to. Sound utilities, you won't have to mess around with that. That's pretty well standard the way it is. Sort of setting up categories for sounds and stuff like that. Palette utilities is if you want to change the look of the screen, you can do that. System settings, we'll cover that another time. Wi-Fi utilities if you want to upgrade the firmware and the radio and things like that. USB settings, what I'll say about this is what you would use to set up the transmitter to use with a flight simulator. You'd go to the game controller, but do not do that with the plane that you set up to fly with, the actual plane. Reason for that is twofold. One is the flight simulator will have slightly different flight characteristics than your actual plane, and so each one ought to be adjusted differently. And the second thing is if at home you're using the flight simulator and you got this on game controller and then you try to use that same thing at the field, it's not going to work because this is going to disable the radio frequency transmission. So just leave this on inhibit, and then if you want to set up one to use of the flight simulator, create a new plane for that one and call it simulator or something like that. Okay, transfer SD card, we don't need to worry about that, and about regulatory, no need there. Okay, having those basic things set up, then we can go back and we can go into the more detailed stuff on the adjustments in the function list. First thing is the servo setup. You can leave this as it is at the moment. If you did want to limit the travel on servos due to some physical limitation, you could do it here, or you can also do it on the DR Expo menu, but this is probably the safest place to do it if you find that things are actually binding up. You'll note that where it says travel up here, you can also select sub-trim and reverse. Sub-trim is for major changes on the trim. I suggest that you ought to set it up physically with everything as dead center as you can, and if you do that, you're not going to need this, and you're going to get the maximum travel out of your servos, but you do have the option here. But reverse is something that you might need to do. Right now they're all one way, but if you find that one control is moving in the opposite direction that you want to, this is a simple way. Just go down there and select it and confirm that you want to reverse it. Okay? So then dual rate in Expo. Okay, what this allows you to do is it allows you to change both the rate at which the control moves, so high rates versus low rates. Lots of movement on the control surface for a little amount of movement on the stick with high rates, and little change, little movement on the control surface per movement on the stick at low rates. But it also allows you to have that different near the center than when the stick is out near the extremity. So back in the good old days when I first started, we had our digital proportional radios, which was the latest technology at that particular time. And the digital proportional, well, the proportional idea is that you move the stick halfway and you got half of the movement, you move it all the way and you got all of the movement, as compared to the radios that were before then were just simply on and off. You move it one way, you got full control movement, you let go, you got no movement, and nothing in between. Okay? So digital proportional gave you this type of thing where you got a straight line relationship between movement on the stick and movement of the control. So we can change that, but before we do that, let's do one other thing. You see the switch down here. We set up flight modes a little while ago. Well, it allows us to be able to pick a switch to use to set the flight modes and to link it up to what we're doing here. So we already did that, setting up that switch to be flight modes. Now when we identify the switch here, it realizes that it's flight modes, and it's now associating flight modes with the various things that we do in the radio. So having selected switch C, we then press in on the wheel, and now we got that selected. So having done that, now when we make changes up here, it'll be associated with a particular flight mode. So back to the dual rates. The first thing is we can make it low rates or we can make it high rates, and that would affect the whole thing, the whole range from stick in the center to out on the edge. A certain, say, 1 millimeter movement on the stick out on the end is going to give you the same change in the position of the control as 1 millimeter the movement of the stick in near the middle. Totally proportional from one end to the other. So we can do high versus low rates, and naturally because of that it's going to reduce how far the control can move at the extreme position. So right now we've got it in our low rate position. And so we'll want to pick something that's going to be a low rate there. So let's say we pick 75%. Okay, but the other thing it allows us to do is to have a much finer control in the middle than what we have on the outside. Now when you go to land, what you like to do is have those precise corrections to just adjust it just that little bit. So often you see somebody try to land and they balloon this way and that way and they got extreme movements all over the place. And yeah, you could move everything down, but what you really need is just near the center there. You need that real fine adjustment to make those little changes as you're coming in. And there'll be times that you do need the extremes as well, but in the middle you want it to be a very fine, low rate sort of environment that you're in. So by going to this Expo, pushing in the button, and cranking that up, you see how it's changed the curve to where now for a given movement of the control, there's a smaller movement of the control surface. And so by having that flattened out, it's as if we had a very low rate overall if we're looking at it right near the middle. But if you're looking at it out near where the stick is at the extreme, it's the equivalent to a very high rate. Okay? So it still gives you the total amount of total movement, but a very fine adjustment in the middle. So let's put that at, say, about 20% for low rates. And you can do it any way you like, okay? There's nothing that's right or wrong about this. You want to have something that you're comfortable with. Okay, so that's our low rate. Now we'll go to our mid rate, and you see it's now indicates that the switch is in the middle position. And you also notice that there's two things that are changing on this switch when we move it. It's changing the little dot underneath the numbers, and it's also changing the black square around the numbers. Now those are two different things. The little dot on the bottom is telling you what the position of the switch is, but the black box above it is telling you whether it's taking action or not in that position. So with this, every place where the switch is, it's got a black box above it, so it's saying it's doing something in every single position it's in. If, for some crazy reason, you decided you didn't want it to do that, then you could take that off and have it not do anything in that position, which would be dumb. But anyway, you could. But that is what that little black box around the number is telling you. So low rates, it's taking action, and the action is that the rate is at 75%, Expo is at 20. I move it to the middle. Right now it's saying that the rate is at 100%, and of course we were at 75. Let's say we take that up to 85. 85, right about there. Okay, and now with the Expo, we're actually going to want a little bit more Expo, in that it's going to go higher, but what we'd like to do is to have the control movement near the middle very similar. So whatever you're doing, if you're wanting that fine sort of touch to it, it feels the same and allows you to get accustomed to it better. Okay, then high rate doesn't have to be 100. You might find that the plane is absolutely crazy at 100. You want something a little bit less. And whatever the Expo is going to be, it's going to be something more than what the other ones were. Now, in terms of working out just where to have that Expo, what I like to do is pick a spot, say about a quarter or a third up the graph, and just have a look at what's happening to that as I move between these different modes. And right now, as I look at it, between 2 and 3, there's very little change. And between the low rate and the mid rate, it's going up when I go to the mid rate a little bit. Okay? So that's probably okay in that a low rate I want to be at especially docile, and it's pretty close. But that's the kind of thing to look at. The other way to deal with that is down here at the bottom. You see this 0, an arrow, and a 0. Is that you can actually, as you move the control, you see both of those numbers changing. Okay, so both of those numbers changing, and you can pick a place to go to, like let's say you're going to 20%, and you look and you see what the control is doing. It says it's at about 10 or 11, 10 to 11. Hard to hold it steady, 10 I'd say. Okay, Now we move up to the next one and we take this up to 20 and we see what is it doing, and it looks like it's about 11. Okay, and then we take it to the next mode and we take it to 20. And it's at 11. So what that's saying is that right here in the real fine sort of area, they're pretty well identical. Okay, and it's as you get farther out that the big change is taking place. Okay, so that's a pretty good setup. Now what you'll do, that was for the aileron. If you, let's get our Expo back where we had it. That's for the aileron. But if you go up here and click on aileron, you can then select elevator and you can select rudder, and you can adjust each one of those for whatever you want. So you go through the same sort of thing. The only thing I will say with regard to those is that with the elevator, when you're coming in for a landing, the plane is at a very low airspeed. And oftentimes people will like to have the nose a bit heavy to make the plane more stable. But if you got a heavy nose and you're landing, you need lots of elevator to keep that nose up. So you might want to give yourself a little bit more elevator. But myself, I personally like to have the plane balance very well to where it can just about come in with neutral elevator. So anyway, just a thought as you set things up. Well, now we want to move on to throttle cut. So the first thing, you have to pick the switch, so press this in. Pick the switch that you want, so typically it'd be this one on the back. And this is a tricky one, in that you want to think about where you want the throttle cut. So we're saying with it pushed all the way back, all these things in the conservative position, that's where we're going to start out. So the back position is how I would suggest that you have it to be cut. So we've moved that switch, that is then selected switch H there, we press in. It then says, okay, the position is minus 100%, so that makes sense. 100% is negative 100%, it's all the way down on the stick. However, trims can be applied to the stick, and it's also possible through the servo setup and with the Expo menu to make it go beyond 100%. So just to be safe, I like to, well, if you're talking about an electric plane, I'd like to set it at like minus 115%, just to make sure that the throttle is really cut. Okay, so now the other thing with regard to what I said about being careful about the position of this switch, you recall that when the number, the black box around the number is all black, that's where it's taking action. So the action is a throttle cut at minus 115%. Where we want that action of the throttle being cut at minus 115 is with the switch in that position. So we have a dot underneath there. We've got the 0 there blackened in, so with that switch back, indeed the action is taking place that the throttle is cut. When we bring the switch up, it moves it to the other position where the action is not taking place, and so in that case the throttle is going to go up like normal. Obviously we don't need a delay on it, so you can ignore that, and then on we go. Okay, throttle curve, just linear is most likely going to be what you want. Analog switch setup, we'll cover that in another video. Digital switch setup, we'll do that in another video. Flap system, yeah. Now, when we go into the flap system, what we want to do is to actually bind this to our plane to where we can make sure we're going in the right direction. So, we're going to do that right now. Now the first thing that you're going to do when you go to bind your aircraft is to make sure you've got it tied down or something is set up to where it can't move anywhere. The prop takes off, you want that to be safe, you want that to be away from you, and you want the plane to be secured to where it can't move forward. So then you take your battery and you put it in place and plug it in. So we'll do that here. Okay. In this particular case, it's already bound to this radio with another sort of thing. But anyway, I'm going to use the bind menu here. So the first thing I do is on the Spektrum transmitter there's a button that I hold in, and that gets it flashing. Then I go to my bind menu and say, do I want to continue? It says put receiver in bind mode before continuing, RF will be disabled, continue, yes. Now I want to bind, so I select binding. It says it's binding. Now the plane goes through its various gyrations, configuring, and it's all set. Okay, so now we've got controls, and the flaps aren't set up yet, but anyway, we've got the various controls in place. Okay, now we did that at this stage because with the flaps, they are made such that they can only go one way. So if these flaps are all the way up, they can't go any farther the other direction. And so if I tried to do something that sent them back higher than where they're supposed to go, I'd be in trouble. So we've specifically done it this way so that we can start out with the flaps in a mid position and then make adjustments to get them the way that we want them. So we go into our menu, so press in on the button, takes us to function list, go down to flap system, select that. We need to first of all select the switch, so we press in on the button to pick a switch, and then we're going to use D as a switch, and we select that one. Okay, so this right now the switch, as you can see the little box moving up and down on the positions, it's working, so it's got that particular switch set up. And by the way, on any of these screens where it's showing you what's happening, typically it shows you other things as well as to various controls, what's happening to them. Shows you that on a little bar graph down at the bottom. But anyway, position 0, 1, and 2. Now I want my switches up to be the way that we are in the nominal position, you know, conservative, you know, safe sort of thing. So I want my flaps to be up in this position. But the thing is that I don't know for sure whether that's positive or negative, okay? And it actually can be different from one plane to another. So I'm going to go over here to the flap, and I'm in position 0. I make sure I got my switch in position 0, so that box is there. I select that, and then I start moving it, and I see which direction I have to go to bring it up. Okay, so I'm bringing that flap up, and in this particular case I'm looking at, on the root of the wing here, it's got a spot that is like in line with the wing, and I want that precisely along that line. Okay, so it's pretty much there. If your ailerons are straight, you can also judge by looking at the edge between the aileron and the elevator. So that is mighty good in that sort of position right there. And so I'm going to press in the button to lock that in. I then go to position 2, the mid position, and I decide whether or not I want that, or a little bit more, or a little bit less. And if I wanted, you know, a little bit less, I could back it off a bit. So maybe I like to do landings, but I just don't want to go too overboard with it. So let's say I put 20% in there. But then, as you put in flaps, it's changing the overall profile of the wing. And as you do that, it's actually moving the center of lift forward on the wing. Center of lift forward on the wing. I had to think there for a second. And with that, it's tending to make the plane want to nose up. So we'd like to put in some down elevator along with the increase in flaps. And so I'll select elevator over here on that side of the menu. And I'm going to dial in a positive, 15, 18%, something like that. And when I go into that position, then that should be changing the elevator accordingly. So as you look at the elevator, can you see the elevator? No, you can't see the elevator. Not very well. But anyway, elevator is going down just a tiny bit. Okay. And then the final position, the full flaps, I select that, and because we went positive on the, oh yeah, we got to get the flaps in that position. Since we went positive on the other ones, we want to go negative on this one. And it depends on how extreme you want to go, but you pick a spot that you're comfortable with in terms of full flaps. And who knows where that might be. And then with that, you want to have even more down elevator, and so you give it a value that you're comfortable with there. Okay, so that's getting the flap set up, and doing in that particular way is quite safe. You're then comfortable with it, you know how it works, and you can then see that the other controls are working, and you're happy as Larry because everything is fine. With our flaps, having set up the 3 different positions, we're almost done, but right now it's just an instant change between the 3 positions. And what we'd like to do is something more realistic and gradual, and also something that allows you to be able to make adjustments to your elevator and trim as you are flying along, so it doesn't happen instantly and send you flying one way or the other. So right now it's on speed normal down there at the bottom. And so I selected that, and I'm going to crank that up to, say, like about 3 seconds. And at 3 seconds, when we go to make a change, we then have a gradual adding into the flaps. And it's much more realistic, like a real plane, and much easier to fly that way. Okay, mixing, we don't have to worry about that on this plane. Range test, that will be happening when you get ready to set up your plane. You can do it from this menu, but the simple thing is you just go out and you use your bind button for the range test. Walk out the 30 meters away from the plane when it's on the bench. Press in the bind button, move the sticks, and visually see that it's moving control surfaces, and you know that you're in good shape. Timer will be important. As you go into timer, you've got the option of setting up a couple of timers, and I'd recommend that you do have 2 timers. That's not that you'd be a 2-timer, but you have 2 timers on your radio. The standard one is a countdown one, and you certainly want that. And you can name it whatever you want, and this will be what's displayed. So you could call it C N T space. And if there was a character there, you could hit this X button to get rid of it. Oops, D. No, it's not letting me go. Okay. So CNTD for countdown. Okay, so that's a timer name. It's a countdown. You can check with your radio and stuff like that, or your plane instructions. It'll probably give you an idea of the time. If not, just be conservative and then gradually adjust that. Start when the throttle stick is over 25%. So the idea is, will you bring this up over 25%, then the clock starts ticking. Anytime you move it down below 20%, it stops the clock, but then it restarts it again anytime you're over 25%, and it keeps accumulating how much time you've been over 25%, and that gives you a pretty good indication of what's happening with your battery. Okay, then what you're going to use to clear the button, and that's the other thing this delete sort of key does, is it's what clears it, and that's saying that's what it's going to do, so that's already set up for us. Now, this is the next important bit, and that is what sort of alerts you're going to get. So, every minute down, let's say you want it to speak to you and just give you a running commentary on how you're going as far as how much time you've got every minute. That's fine. At 1 minute, what's going to happen as far as something in addition to that, you could have a tone, but if you've already got the voice happening, that's probably good enough. But then at 30 seconds, perhaps have a tone. At 20 seconds, maybe get a vocal reminder you know, just in case one type of thing isn't working. Then all the way from 10 second to 1 second every second, beeping a tone, and then another tone when it's expired. And then every minute thereafter a tone. Okay? So that there is important. Timer start and stop. You don't really need the start and stop. That's like when you go past the 25%, that beep that you're hearing there. So if I inhibit that and I inhibit the stop one, then I do that, I don't get a tone. But if I do reset the timer using the X key up there, then it does give me a tone. Okay, so we've got that, but now we want to go back and set up a second timer. So I'm going to go back to the start of this. Okay, so we got timer 1. Now I'm going to make timer 2. And timer 2, this is going to be a stopwatch. So we're going to say total time for this one. See, I got that selected. T-O-D. There we go. Okay, total time. Okay. Mode is going to be a stopwatch. And again, it's going to function anytime the throttle stick is over 25%. Same thing as far as clearing it. It'll be cleared at the same time. But with this one, we don't want any tones because the countdown timer is giving us all the warnings. And that's the only reason we've really got the countdown timer, is to warn us when we're out of time. And I might mention the reason for that is that when you are counting down, and you see countdown and total, when the thing is counting down, you'll see it ticking off, and of course the total time is adding up. But when this countdown gets to 0, it'll start counting back the other way without any other indication that it's going past time. So you only can know that it's going over time by watching it and see which direction it's going. And when you're flying, you're going to pick this thing up for a quick look to see what's going on, and you might mistake it for the wrong side of 0, you know. So by having that total time down at the bottom, that's the one that you glance at when you're glancing during your flying to make sure that you're okay. The other one, you don't really only have it there to be providing those warnings along the way, but what you're really looking at is the elapsed time down at the bottom. Okay, now, having done all of that, there's one other thing that you want to do. Oops, yeah, I just changed the volume. Okay, one other thing you want to do, and that is make sure everything's going in the right direction. And if they're going in the wrong direction, then go to Servo Setup, and where you got the travel, you've got other options that are there. Got sub-trim, that's doing major changes in your trim, which you probably won't need to do. But then this reverse area, you select that, it allows you to go to a particular channel and reverse it if it's going in the wrong direction. So just check all of your surfaces, make sure they're going in the right way, and if you need to make it opposite, this will do it for you in a flash. Well, that's the basics on setting up your transmitter, and so give it a go and get flying. And where you have specific questions in some of these detailed areas, I'm producing videos for each one of them that goes into it in detail. So you'll be able to see just exactly what's going on by selecting the video that deals with the area that you're looking at. Well, happy flying, and I wish you all the very best. This is RC Jim signing off.